Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 594th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Sagaman, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Benjamin Tischer, Clarity Haynes, Leah Gangitano, Scott Treleaven, Ryan Martin, and host Ksenia Soboleva. We're thrilled to welcome poet Elroy Red here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. The Brooklyn Rail would like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive. You can view today's event and our full archive on the Rail's YouTube channel. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guests and host. Benjamin Tischer is the curator of Breyer P-Orridge, We Are But One at Pioneer Works, and formerly the co-owner of the gallery Invisible Exports, which championed Breyer P-Orridge's practice for 14 years. Tischer is an independent curator, art advisor, and private dealer operating under the moniker New Discretions. In 2001, Leah Gangitano founded Participant Inc. New York, a nonprofit art space of which she is now the director. She has served as curator of Thread Waxing Space, New York, associate curator at the ICA Boston, and as a curatorial advisor at MoMA PS1. She teaches at the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College. Clarity Haynes is known for her long-standing explorations of the torso as a site for painted portraiture. Works in her breast portrait project, always painted from life and usually monumental in scale, have focused on themes of healing, trauma, and self-determination. Feminist and queer craft practices are often honored in her work. Scott Truleven is a Canadian visual artist who first came to attention in the early 90s through a series of influential zines and short films. Since then, Truleven has continued to explore transcendental currents running through painting, photography, and a variety of other media. And Ryan Martin is the co-founder of Deus Records, a record label founded in 2007 specializing in experimental and electronic sounds, avant-garde, and underground pop music. Martin was Genesis P-Orridge's manager through Deus Records and is currently vice president of P-Orridge's estate. And finally, our host today, New York-based writer and art historian, Dr. Ksenia Soboleva, specializes in queer art and culture. She holds a PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU with a dissertation titled Fragments, Art, AIDS, and Lesbian Identity in the United States. Her writings have appeared in The Rail, Bomb Magazine, Hyperallergic, Art Agenda, and various exhibition catalogs, and she is currently the Andrew W. Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in Gender and LGBTQ+ History at the New York Historical Society. And with that, I'll gladly hand it over to you, Ksenia.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you to everyone who's here, and thank you to the Brooklyn Rail for making this possible. I'm so excited to be in conversation with all these fantastic speakers today, and mainly to witness the conversations between you. I thought this was such a deeply moving show that really felt like a sanctuary, and it includes artworks and ephemera and video footage, and has like a relic-like quality. And it really focuses on a collaborative project between Genesis Breyer P-Orridge and their romantic partner, Lady Jane Breyer P-Orridge. And I remember reading on the wall text that it was about loving someone so deeply that you want to become one. So Ben, I guess my first question would be directed at you. How did this show come about, and what was the process of putting it together like? Because I know that a lot of the materials in the show you actually discovered as you were packing up Jen's apartment.
Yeah, correct. So the impetus of the show is actually the text drawings that are accompanying a video that Genesis and Jay did with Sam Zimmerman in 2002 to 2003. It's right as they were preparing to go into the Pandrogyny Project. Everything was still theory at the time, but obviously Jen and Jay had been talking about this nonstop for years. And when we were cleaning out Genesis's apartment, I've moved Genesis twice. I thought that I knew everything in that place. These drawings came up and we were just completely boggled, like none of us had seen them before. And then in a conversation with Sam, he was like, oh yeah, those are the drawings from a video that we did. The video was Jen and Jay taking turns switching a shirt that they both wore that would kind of confuse the viewer as to who was writing the text. And evidently all the text was written without any forethought or discussion. Like oftentimes Jen, whoever wasn't on camera would leave the room. And like it was just kind of like this magical, automatic, real-time artwork being created. And the reason that video had never come to light is because there was like a technological glitch that like created imperfection in the white balance. Now the technology is such that that was easily rectified. So we were able to present this. The original show at Pioneerworks was only going to be the drawings and the video. And then as we discussed it with Gabe, we just decided that it needed to be bigger, and it got bigger and bigger. And then the introduction of the shrine, Alter Everything, that Ksenia P-Orridge created, you know, that was kind of like, we really, like, obviously there's that entire show there without it, but no one was really able to grieve Genesis's dropping her body, as it happened right at the beginning of COVID. And, you know, there's so many people, I think, that have been affected by her. And by creating this shrine with kind of personal relics from Jen's life and also that of Caress and Jay and Jeunesse, this is kind of a memorial show in a sense to Genesis as well. And so that is the impetus.
Absolutely, and I think that memorial quality really comes across, and also especially in the room that streams all the videos. I sat in there for a long time, and it was so moving. And the documentation that is shown of the plastic surgeries that they undertook together, had that been exhibited before?
So yeah, that had been exhibited before. Actually, much of it was exhibited at Mass MoCA, in a show called The Believers when it was first created. And then I believe also Jeffrey Deitch showed some, and Leah, I think you showed some at Participant as well, right? So they have shown, they haven't shown as much as the other things. Genesis was always about 20 years ahead of whatever culture could consume. So I think that those works were a little bit ahead of their time, and they're being presented now. They just seem so contemporary and of like the current dialogue that it's kind of incredible.
Yeah, she was a visionary. And Leah, you did the first show of Genesis's work in 2005 at Participant. Of course, not surprising that you were the first person to show that work. What was that experience like? Because this would have been 2 years after they had started working on the Androgyny project.
It was 2005. So I think the project had been ongoing for some years. Would this be a good time to just share a tiny bit about that show?
Absolutely. Yes, please.
Okay. It was a good segue, since Ben mentioned being ahead of one's time, because in sort of my life experience, the persons who introduced we, they pronouns in my life, that was Jen and Jay, and that was leading up to and around the first exhibition of Breyer P-Orridge, the merged identity. The show is called Change the Way to Perceive and Change All Memory. As I said, 2005. So at that time, Jen said something, and I'll quote, the most transgressive thing right now is intimacy. This has become more true as years, months, and now each day passes. This exhibition, a particular manifestation of Genesis Breyer P-Orridge and Miss Lady J. Breyer P-Orridge's collaboration, which in our sort of press release, we referred to it as beginning in the early 90s. So the project focused on a central concern of their merged identity, which was the fictional self. And I'm quoting them, considering the I of our consciousness as a fictional assembly or collage that resides in the environment of the body, unquote. They sought to transcend the limits of bodily gender, or more specifically having a body, through pandrogyny. And, you know, they referenced Burroughs and Geisen and how they were applying cut-up techniques to their identity, behavior, and gender. This application led to the substantially irreversible process of cutting up identity to produce a third whole, one that could potentially redesign a binary world. And to quote them, pandrogyny is not about defining differences, but about creating similarities, not about separation, but about unification and resolution. And if I could continue just for a minute longer, because I will defer to Scott and other panelists, as well as I think some audience members who are more expert in the language of magic. I'm just going to share a little story of experiencing their magic firsthand. And I guess you could go to the slide of the sigil. That's kind of that one. Yeah. So this is brief. Approaching the night, the opening night of the exhibition, I witnessed this resolution that I was just citing through their spontaneous assembly of a complex work that had been described many times over the course of several months of preparation for the show, but whose elements had lingered unfinished as disparate materials scattered around the gallery. This yet to be sigil, an object regarded by definition to be a functional sign considered magical, assembled essentially private investigations into the self in belief that, quote, the future is open to subjective influence, unquote. To affect that influence, their ritual maelstrom of gems, feathers, horns, sexual fluids, blood, and hair, in particular, Jay's ponytail, here came together with Polaroid staged and taken years prior, meticulously cut up in the moment and reconfigured to form precise, perfectly fitted starbursts before my eyes, as if it had always existed, driven by some future altering agency. I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was beautiful. And perhaps this is a good moment to go to you, Scott, because as I understand it, your relationship with Jen was very much revolved around your shared interest in the occult, and you knew each other for 20 years.
Yeah, I met Jen in 2000, I met Jen and Jay in 2000 at something called DisinfoCon, which was a one-day conference which brought together people who were interested in the intersections of popular culture and magic. And it had people like Kenneth Anger and Robert Anton Wilson, a variety of people there. we just became friends very quickly, and Jen sort of stepped in to kind of take on a role of, magical mentor for me in my art practice. I was studying psych and sociology. I was sort of moving into my master's program at the University of Toronto, and this was in 2003. What happened was I decided that I couldn't resist trying to become an artist full time anymore, and so I had quit my program and bicycled home and went to bed that night thinking, oh my God, what have I done? I've kind of detoured my life, sort of an act of faith. And Jen and Jay called me that night at I guess it was like 3 or 4 in the morning. And I answered the phone and they said, we're unveiling the Pandergine. We're going to do the Breaking Sex performance in Montreal at the VAV Gallery in December. Do you want to participate in it? We want a third person for this ritual. Are you in? And it was 4 in the morning. I just woke up. I said, yeah, that sounds great. And kind of put down the phone and then forgot that I had had the conversation. And then a few weeks later, this train ticket appeared in the mail and it all came back to me. And I was like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? But this ended up actually being the first thing on my artist CV was this performance. So I had gone to Montreal to meet Jen and Jay. We had done sort of private rituals sort of amongst ourselves before. Jen and Jay had sort of stayed with me in Toronto a few times, and I'd gone down to visit them innumerable times, and sort of enjoyed staying in the Gates Institute, as they called it, which is always a bit like being in a French farce. There were like costume changes and different characters came rushing through and there were animals running all over the place. There were ferrets and cats and dogs. And so I was kind of used to kind of joining the circus. And so I got there, it was freezing cold. I don't know if anyone's been to Montreal, who's on the panel, but it was very, very cold there. But it hadn't yet snowed. Jen and Jay were teaching a sigil workshop. And sigils are now kind of in common parlance. I mean, sigils used to be much more obscure back then, like even in the early 2000s. Now they're kind of sigils to magic are sort of what macrame was to 60s decor. Like it's a very kind of fundamental thing. But they were teaching a sigil workshop to a university class or people that had signed up that were at Concordia University in Montreal. And the sigils ended up becoming part of the backbone of this performance. And the performance was to unveil the Pandergine. Jen had just had her top surgery, had just recovered from her top surgery. So this is the first time Jen was appearing in public naked, as a lot of the performances were. And should I give details of the performance? Are people interested in to know what the unveiling was? So,
I am.
Yeah. So it involved, they wanted to, well, first of all, we went and we hunted through Chinatown and the Little India areas of Montreal to look for objects that could be repurposed to sort of, with ritual intent. I remember Jen had picked out a lot of tiny little bells that she then attached to her hafada piercings, her scrotal piercings, so that when she walked around, they made this really loud jingling sound. I can never actually hear the sound of sleigh bells or Christmas noises without thinking of Jen's scrotum now, which actually kind of takes the pressure off of Christmas a lot. Anyway, so we had all of these materials, and I had made some masks for us to wear, and it began with them filling the gallery with salt. The gallery was banked one of the main streets in Montreal, and the long curtain had been drawn to kind of make the space more intimate, so it was sort of obscured from the road. We filled the gallery with salt, which would eventually be replaced with sugar as the performance went on, sort of suggesting the transformation from the bitterness of life to the sweetness of life. And Genesis and I were cocooned, or began cocooned, and Jay was in this long floor length dress and came and released both Jen and I from our cocoons. I was there as the sympathetic cis male performer. Jay was there as the cis female performer, and Jen was the birthed Pandrogyne. And Jen and I were in these body stockings with strawberries where our genitals were. And once we had been born, once Jay had kind of released us from these womb cocoons, we went through a series of performative actions, sort of following the rules of performance, which is do whatever you want, but just do it very slowly. So we went through all these motions, but it kind of culminated in us crushing the strawberries, like almost like sort of birthing our genitals from that moment. And then it gets a little hazy for me because Jen went into a trance, and then there was a kind of contact trance that kind of took over me. And so the middle part I can't quite remember, but I remember kind of coming to, I had been lashed to Jay. Jay was now naked all of a sudden. She had been in the background in her full-length dress, taking the sigils that the class had made and was hammering them to the wall with almost these, like they look like railroad spikes, these enormous nails. And so the wall had been covered in a sort of rough psychic cross formation with these sigils. But now here I was bound to Jay, and Jay was an exceptional belly dancer. And she had started undulating her stomach while we were kind of bound face to face. I felt this and kind of snapped back into sort of conscious awareness with Jay doing this undulation. And I started to laugh, and Jay started to laugh. And that's actually a very Breyer P-Orridge hallmark, is they'll take you to a particular threshold. And there's a certain part that people resist or can't go past. And whether it's allegory or humor, they found this thing that kind of gets you over that hurdle and into the next space, or allows the material to kind of sink in deeper. Not because it's not serious, but because we have so many defenses built up against this, this material, or we're prone to intellectualizing it so that it can't be fully ingested or integrated. And so there, Jay and I were bound together laughing, and Jen went over and opened the curtains. So these three naked people facing a main street in Montreal, and what had happened while the performance was going on, and the space was now filled with sugar and salt. And a lot of, I don't know what liquids we were using, but we were all covered in, we were basically candied. We were covered in sugar. I actually found one of the items that I was wearing. This is a weeping Buddha talisman, and you can see it's been candied. So it's just covered in sugar and strawberry juice and whatever else was there. Anyway, Jen threw open these curtains, and it had snowed during the performance. And so all this sugar and salt, which was kind of banked up against the wall, now looked like it actually had flowed out and filled the space outside. And the other kind of miraculous thing that had happened is a lot of the students from the sigil class had made sigils in the snow outside. The people that couldn't get in to see the performance had made sigils in the snow outside. So it was kind of the Pandrogyne landscape had just kind of extended off into infinity. It was incredible. It was, but
Sounds like it. Yeah.
Having
There's
been for so long, these sorts of things happen all the time.
Yeah. Is there any video footage of that? There's no archival.
No, Jen didn't want any photographs or video taken of this particular performance.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was, although Kuhn was definitely not allergic to photography or anything, and Jen was kind of avid about having everything recorded and everything transcribed. This one, for some reason, was a little different for them. I think they felt with the initiating breaking sex, or it should happen more as a traditional magical event where there's no trace left.
Yeah.
Except for the action itself.
Yeah. Well, I think your recounting of it now will be a great archival material for the future. And Clarity, I want to move over to you because Jen's interest in the occult is also highlighted in your painting of her, which you made in 2019. And I would love to hear more about that artistic exchange. And also, I think one of the things that was so interesting for me about the show as an art historian is that it really demonstrates that she was a collage artist, really. You know, she was so informed by techniques of collage. And so I would love to hear more about the kinds of conversations that you had.
Yeah.
And let's show the painting.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was in a show with Jen at Invisible Exports in 2017, and I met Jen because we were on a panel together, and I really was not that familiar with her before that, with her work. It was really through Invisible Exports and what they had shown of her visual work. And I was a little nervous to ask. When I saw her forearm, and I saw the layers of tattoos, the fresh recent tattoos and the blurry older ones, and the way they just had such a history, I just thought I have to paint this person. And then Tischer encouraged me to ask Jen, because Jen already had been diagnosed with leukemia at that time. And nobody really knew how long, she had. And surprisingly, she was very open to coming to my studio to sit for this portrait. And that really gave us an opportunity to have just intimate dialogues and just kind of, unstructured time of just silence or chatting. Everybody knows Jen was quite the storyteller. So I pretty much heard her entire life story through that time. Which later, having read her memoir, which she was working on at the time of the sitting and just came out, I think last year, I was able to really see everything in context, like her whole story, stuff I didn't completely get, I really kind of understood. So I recommend for everyone to read Non-Binary, Jen's memoir. And obviously, as an artist who made work about her body and about the body and had so many interesting thoughts, and whose body has actually been part of their own artwork. It was a real honor to paint this body because I'm interested in the stories that the body tells. And the torso is for me an interesting place to look at, because it's a place that isn't the place that most people automatically have seen or would recognize, right? Well, in Jen's case, a lot of people would, because those tattoos are very well known. That charm necklace is very well known. The locket has, a photograph of Lady J, a photograph of Jen. There's a tattoo of Lady J on one of the forearms. And I really felt like she was there with us because she has this little kind of like winking, smiling face. We also listen to music, and we listen to some Throbbing Gristle and Psychic TV, but we also listen to a lot of Jen's friends' music. And that was really sweet. And this is a photograph of Jen's 70th birthday, which we happened to have her scheduled to come. So we had balloons, and Ben
had a cake.
Yeah, Ben brought a cake. Benjamin Tischer brought a beautiful cake. And David Charles was shooting a documentary about Jen, and he was there too. And Jen was wearing like an oxygen, had brought an oxygen tank. And so it was really getting frail at that time. Yeah, it was really an amazing experience. And one thing, for example, there were so many stories, but just one example of one of the stories, you can see that there's on one breast, there's a scar. I guess maybe in the next, there might be a better image in the next one, but that was the birthday cake. Yeah. And there you can actually see.
I love this photo. Yeah.
Yeah. Instagram was terrible about censoring any imagery of, but yeah, this was a beautiful photograph that David Charles took. And this is the finished painting. And you can see the scar on her left breast. And having done a lot of portraits of people who had breast cancer, I thought that it was like a scar from maybe cancer or surgery. And so I asked about it, and Jen said, no, that was from actually Sex Play with Lady J. Lady J had
And she was a dominatrix.
yeah, and she had been using a knife in the sex play, and she had gone like too deep. And so it was really quite like, you know, an incredibly deep cut. And I don't know, if Lady J suggested that they should go to the hospital, but Jen said it would be fine, and it was. So now she had the scar to show for that. So there were just so many stories like that, and
Yeah,
you know,
I mean,
it
this
was,
conflation of pleasure and pain is
yeah,
so palpable in the show as well, and her use of skin as a medium itself.
definitely. And as part of the project, I always have my models write in just in their handwriting in a book that I have.
Oh.
And so I had Jen write, and if you don't mind, I can read what
I would
she
love
wrote,
that.
because her whole philosophy of art, which, you know, involves the cut-ups and things, is sort of expressed here. So this is 19th July 2018. Dearest Clarity, we rarely are touched by contemporary paintings. Too much, quote, deceptual art, as Brian Geisen would say. Years ago, we studied with a Cheyenne Apache shaman. Talking with him about, quote, capital A-R-T, art, he explained to me how he assessed artworks with questions. 1, is this telling me something we never knew before? It's actually cum thing we never knew before, C-O-U-M thing we never knew before. And is it adding positivity to my world? 2, is this giving cum thing to my community it didn't know before? Is it adding cum thing positive to my cum unity? Cum dash unity, which I love. 3, is this teaching the world cum thing new that adds to our world positively? We find we use these checks ourself, capital S-E-L-F, when viewing new arts. Butter, we also add another question, quote, capital, all capitals, what's the story? What are we learning that we didn't know before? And what is it telling we about this mystery of Ovi being apparently alive? No story, no good, all caps. Your paintings scream yes to every question. Stories are clearly written in flesh and scars, saying so much. We are truly honored to be included in your community of torsos. So much to know, honored greatly. Thank you. Love, Genesis Breyer P-Orridge. And I just love reading these words, the way she wrote, reinvented language, and her voice, which is also really strong in her memoir. So, yeah.
Wow, that is a thing to cherish. It's beautiful.
Definitely.
I love that all of you have these personal memories, and I find that as somebody who never met Jen, hearing people who did know her, recount memories, almost makes me feel like I did know her. And Ryan, perhaps we can move to you now, because you are the vice president of the estate, but you also were Jen's manager, and you really, I think that her music career is something that is understandably not so much highlighted in this show, but perhaps you can speak to that and how, in what ways that was still manifested in the Pandrogyny project.
Well, I think Jen lived a lot of lives, when trying to explain Jen's work, or entire career. The Pandrogyny stuff was, towards the end, but was very long, was 20 years. But compared to everything else, it's like this person had been making work, music, visual art, films, tons of books, a lot of, writing poetry and stuff for almost, 60 plus years. And so, you know, when we are talking about the music and how it like kind of fell in with the artwork, it's it gets very complicated because you know, every couple years Jen would completely switch gears and, you know, kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you were dealing with a whole different person with all these new ideas and new concepts and new, you know, everything at the core was the same, but you know, when you look at her music career and butt it up against her art career, you can see where these kind of like little flashpoint moments sort of happen. And oddly enough, even though they're drastically different practices, they do line up very well. Like when, you know, it was turning to more sculptural work, you notice that the music and everything else that she was working on was taking a drastically different approach and different change. And so, yeah, it's a massive catalog and a massive body of work that, you know, when I came on board, I wasn't at first Jen's manager. I got a gig with Jen, kind of helping to catalog or like organize her archives, and then that fell into me helping out with like as an art studio assistant. Because I remember helping Jay whenever I go to the Pioneer Work show and see that giant painting with the gold leaf, I was like, and you know, in canvases, me and Jay would sit on the ground at the Gates Institute and gold leaf, and like, I learned how to gold leaf through there, and then Jen would be just kind of cutting up all this stuff and placing everything. It was like a really kind of alive sort of situation there. So I was doing that for years up until Jackie had passed away, and myself and a couple others kind of stepped in to help Jen because Jackie had kind of did a lot for Jen, like of you know, kind of day-to-day sort of things, and we didn't want, you know, these things to kind of fall apart because you know, it was really rough. That was 2007, end of 2007. So I had kind of stepped in, and along with Ben was a huge help, and someone else named Eddie, who was a close friend and, you know, was helping out as well. So Jen had asked me to, you know, be her manager, and I actually turned it down 2 or 3 times because that's just not what I do. And finally she talked me into it, and kind of worked on that, and definitely worked on like organizing this massive body of work in all forms, which is still ongoing, even you know, with Jen not being here. It's been like, you know, over 2 years. And yeah, I think someone had said earlier, I believe it was Ben, that the show, we were just like, you know, no one had time to grieve afterwards. And I was talking with, I've mentioned this to a few people, but I remember speaking with Jen's daughter, Janess, and saying that when people are like, you know, how was it, you know, grieving, you guys, you know, all of you were so close and everything. And I was like, it's as if Jen never left, because from that moment on, you know, with the pandemic starting, it was just so much work with the estate, and that's, you know, everyone's still wrapped up in. So Jen never, at least in my world, Jen never left. I'm just not getting the texts and phone calls every day, and you know, obviously I miss all the physical, you know, interactions of just like hanging out day to day and going there and going out to dinner and all that stuff. But Jen hasn't gone anywhere. You know, every day I got Jen still around. So yeah, the show was kind of, or is a really nice sort of collection of that era, and also a nice reminder of those drawings that were what the show started as. yeah, I was, you know, me and Ben and everyone, we were all there at the apartment when we were packing up Jen's apartment, which before we packed up the apartment, I thought it was going to be a really, you know, sad, very tough thing for all of us to go through. And kind of the opposite happened. It was really, I mean, I felt we were all having a really nice time, and it was really celebratory. And I think it kind of brought a lot of people a lot closer. Even though Jen wasn't there, Jen was very much there. And of course, we found these drawings, and it was like, as Ben said, Ben was like, I've moved Jen multiple times. I thought I knew everything. I thought I knew everything too. Like there's just every little thing. People come to me, what is this? And I usually have an answer. That was the one thing where I'm like, I've never seen those before in my life. Wow. And I've seen everything. And how have I never seen these? And Ben is like, how have I never seen it? So we're all kind of puzzled by this. And Sam was helping to pack up the apartment as well. He just wasn't there that day. He came the next day. And I was like, oh, Sam, you should see what we found. We found these, you know, kind of drawings or whatever. I told him about it. And then I think I wasn't there during the middle of the day after I told him, and Sam was like, I know what those are. You know, Ben was like showing them to him, and he's like, yeah, I have a video of those actually. And we're like, what? Not only do you know what they are, you made a video? And it was like from almost 20 years ago. And it was like, the surprises keep coming. And I believe as a little story anecdote of another like surprise kind of thing that I'm sure we're going to be finding these for many years to come, was years ago, Jen made these sculptures just for friends, made about 4 or 5 of them, called surprise boxes. And actually I have mine here, it's on the other side of the room. And they were each one was different, and it was in a different box. Some, you know, just like these weird boxes or jewelry boxes or whatever that Jen would kind of find around the world and bring back. She'd always bring back raw materials from Nepal and Haiti and stuff. And I went over there one day, this was like 10 to 12 years ago, and was like, hey, I have something for you. It's a surprise box. I made them for my close friends. I was like, oh, thank you. And you open it up, and it's this whole assemblage on the inside and everything. And I asked her, I was like, oh, who else did you make them for? And she's like, oh, I made one for, you know, so-and-so, and Ben. And I remember her telling me she made one for Ben. So when we were cleaning out the apartment, I think it was like a little bit before, I was like, oh, Ben, do you still have your surprise box? And Ben was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I was like, Jen made you a surprise box, these sculpture boxes like 10 years ago. She's like, I never got one. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, no, and I don't know if I sent a picture of mine. And I was like, no, she told me she made you one because she had them there. She had like 4 or 5 of them. I saw them, and everyone's names on them on the bottom. And Ben's like, no, I never got it. And I'm like, oh man, that's crazy. So we're cleaning out the apartment, and I believe it was Caress, if I'm remembering correctly, found this weird box with I think it was like a pole or something on it. It was like very ornate. And Chris was like, hey, I found this thing, and Ben, your name's on it on the bottom or whatever. And I'm like, that's the surprise box. I remember seeing it, and I opened it up, and there was a whole sculpture on the inside, and it was like to Ben and everything. It's like Jen made it, but forgot to give it to Ben. Right. And it was just surprise. Like in the apartment the whole time, surprise. And it was like, you know, of course, Ben's surprise. I got my surprise 10 years ago. Ben got his surprise while we're cleaning out the apartment, you know, months after Jen had passed away. Because Jen was like, oh no, I you know, you got to wait for this surprise. Right. This one's going to come very unexpectedly. It was like a true surprise. And because I thought I was crazy, I was just like, no, I swear. Jen was like, I made one for Ben. I saw it. And then when she comes out of the room, instantly, I'm like, that's the surprise box. And so who knows? We haven't really been, I mean, we've only scratched the surface, you know, speaking on behalf of the estate, you know, of things we're going through and finding, photographs, files, master tapes, like, you know, we're going to be at it for a while. Yeah, and then we're diligently working on it, but there's constant surprises.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you said about her shifting gears, you know, so quickly and so often, because one of the things for me that I would love everybody's thoughts on is that, this erasure of difference is really highlighted in the Pandrogyny project. Yet in many ways, you could say that that's actually contradictory to queer identity. And is that something, do you think that that was something that was just specific to the Pandrogyny project, or was the erasure of difference something in her practice at large? And would you shift gears on that as well?
Oh, sorry.
What's that?
Go ahead, Ryan. I'll jump in after you.
I would say that it has always been a thing, even with the concept of the person Genesis P-Orridge. That wasn't obviously not Jen's birth name, but Jen having to take it a couple notches higher than everyone else when people in like art and music, and it was definitely a thing in music where people would have stage names. So, you were so-and-so, but on stage you were Slash or something like that. In January 1971, Genesis started slowly becoming Genesis in the late 60s as a nickname. And Genesis Megson, we found some things signed by during that time period. But in 71, after kind of adopting this Genesis P-Orridge, went and legally changed their name by deed poll. In effect, and for the purpose of this person, Neil Megson, who, as far as Jen was concerned, was a different person, they're gone now. We got to kill off that character because this new person, Genesis P-Orridge, it's a character, took over Neil, and kind of Genesis slowly started, hanging out with Neil, and then you could see the name evolve, the way she would sign things and the way people would refer to Jen. It was Neil, and then it was Genesis, then Jen, and then finally Genesis P-Orridge took over Neil and was like, "You got to go now." Sent Neil on his way, and that's a radical move to do in 1971. Like that's a very radical thing to do at that time, and so it has always been there. Including the whole concept of Genesis P-Orridge was a killing off of something else. And then that person or a character, or however you want to refer to it, it was kind of killing off. Look, anytime anything got too familiar or too comfortable, it was time to go. This isn't what I'm about. There was no challenge anymore. And the challenge of identity and stuff.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that to me, it seems that difference is so inherent to her practice. Yet in the Pandrogyny project, there is sometimes I feel that there is an emphasis on actually becoming a stable identity with somebody else, which goes against this idea that, identity is a construct and is constantly shifting, which I find is very interesting. And I would embrace that contradictory nature, right? So,
100%.
If I could jump in,
there was a lot of contradictions in it, but also and I believe it's in one of the pieces in the show. There was one of the collages that says gender is such a drag, I believe, and there was always the thing of when I first started working with Jen and the Pandrogyny thing was really first kind of bubbling up as a visual practice. It was the press was very much like, oh, look at these two trying to look like each other, and Jen was like, we're not trying to look like each other, we're trying to become this whole other thing, and completely, we don't want to be any gender, we don't want to be any of it, just the creation of it, as you said, like a kind of stable thing, but it was also kind of it wasn't really them. It was its own thing, which kind of falls back on the whole Geis and Burroughs third mind kind of concept. And so almost like pushing off the contradiction onto another entity, which would allow Jen the freedom probably to then kind of explore other mediums within it and stuff like that. And be like, the contradiction's over here in this other concept. Just like initially when Neil had to go away, and now we got Genesis P-Orridge, who has the freedom to do whatever they feel like and not be bound by the things that Neil are. And Jen and Jackie didn't want to be bound by, you know, these genders that were, and the identity that comes along with them, and pushing it off into this third thing, this pandrogyne, which was, you know, there's the necklaces, there's all these kind of symbols that they were using as a representation of that. And then, you know, and then the whole practice of kind of getting there and everything, but still being able to kind of dance around that whole concept and, like, you know, explore other avenues, which does create, yeah, you're right, it does create massive contradiction, because, you know, all of this, everything around us is a contradiction, and trying to make sense of it by creating something that's not us, something else, like completely outside of people, and like creating this non-gender but yet third gender, which is a contradiction itself, and like pushing that over there so that can live in its own space. So that's why the show is, you know, it's Breyer P-Orridge. It's not Genesis P-Orridge. It's not Jackie Breyer.
Ben, I'd love your thoughts as well.
Oh, sure. I would just, like, everything that Ryan said is absolutely true. One of the things that we presented at Pioneer Works was this evening of archival footage of Genesis. And one of the things that stuck with me was that every single clip, Genesis had a completely different look, kind of a different way of even speaking and presenting herself. I think that change was probably one of the most core tenets of her practice. I mean, she changed language, she changed her body, she changed everything. So I think that your whole thing of like androgyny erasing differences, I think that that's just one thing that it does. Like, that's one lesson, and then they would move on to the next thing. Like, we don't know what was after androgyny, unfortunately, but I'm sure that, like, that was, again, just a step in the ladder, so to speak. It was in some of the footage that is included in the video program is also these very early interviews before surgery that Genesis did with Nicholas Jenkins. And one of the things that she goes back to over and over again is that this, like, trans culture and androgyny is very much a step towards evolution. And, like, she thought that like, by adjusting bodies and rearranging bodies, that we were moving towards a place that we became more humane, is how she addressed it, which I think is also interesting, and comes out in the show how so much of the work has, like, kind of sacred connotations as well.
Mm-hmm. I think, Scott, that's something that you mentioned to me as well, that she really loved that quote by Bell Hooks, where Bell Hooks writes that trans identity is the most perfect embodiment of intersectionality.
Yeah, Jen was always concerned about the kind of the sort of dissipation of gender and sexuality into these compartments. And I think the key to understanding Genesis and her kind of continual transformations is she not merely believed, but had experience with the fact that, you know, we have these identities that are kind of, you know, we superimpose on ourselves to navigate the oddity of being alive, but we're in fact connected intimately to a multiplicity. The multiplicity, everything around you allows you to exist. There's no such thing as, you know, an individual in a void. There's no such thing as an object that exists independent of everything else. And so Jen's reasoning was, if we dwell in this multiplicity, and the multiplicity is an intimate part of ourselves, what does it mean to be open to that multiplicity? What happens to, you know, the lawful form called personality or I, when those bonds are broken open and we allow ourselves to kind of flow into it and for it to flow into us? And so naturally you wouldn't be lashed to one iteration of personality, you know, one artistic ideal, one mode of musicality, any of those things. And Jen and Jay believed that the pandrogyne was almost like a vehicle that it would allow them to take a further step into this disruption of selfhood, and that they had gone as far as they could as individuals. And I mean, we all know that, it's very hard to escape the idea of the I. It's constantly reinforced. Every time you go online, every time you talk to someone, you present this form that you've inherited that's constantly reinforced. And so all these threads we try to pick at to kind of free ourselves from that kind of hits the limit of the individual each time. And so the Pandrogyne was, like I said, this vehicle or this kind of satellite that would launch into a new stratosphere of freedom in terms of experiencing this multiplicity. Jen's plan for after the Pandrogyne project, which she was kind of beginning to embody, was she was very intimately involved with the Tibetan Buddhist community. And I always said to her, if it wasn't for, if the Temple of Psychic Youth hadn't existed and she were to direct me to a religious structure, what's the closest thing that she would advise one go into? And it's a question, I get from younger people all the time who want to get into magic or some kind of spiritual practice. And she said Tibetan Buddhism is the closest thing she knew of that that mirrored her belief of the way that the cosmos is constructed and the way that we should inhabit it. That the underpinning mode to reality, to the solute that we exist in, is compassion. And that is the supreme force of the universe that we should all strive for. Anything less than that is, a misdirection, a willful misdirection of the self that will inevitably lead to more suffering for yourself and others. And that, this dissolution into this unification with all the people and all of the things around you. And so she started wearing, orange a lot. She started wearing these, she had this hilarious, she had a biker identity that was kind of existing at the same time. And then she had her sadhu identity, which is the kind of like religious or spiritual iteration. And I mean, that's very Jen too, to kind of like have the sort of the Hell's Angels vibration going on at the same time the holy person vibration is going on, and not inherently seeing a contradiction in that. But I think that towards the end of her life, that idea that she was stepping into the multiplicity, where Jay already dwelt, helped her a lot. The day she died, I had run across town to, my mom had been traveling and was like coming home, and this was like in the days, the early quarantine days, and I had gone over to her apartment, like stocked her fridge with food so she could quarantine. And I came home and I was exhausted, and there were all these texts on my phone saying, "I'm so sorry, have you heard?" And I didn't know that Jen had died, because I thought there would be a thunderclap or, some kind of sign. I mean, Jen always said like, "Oh, if something happens to me, I'll let you know." But as Ryan was saying, it occurred to me like later, she didn't really leave. She's very present. So there was, of course, no, sky opening up or anything like that, because the shift was very small. She already had kind of one foot in the multiverse, the multiplicity, the totality that we dwell in. And so
Yeah.
I don't think it was a huge leap. And I don't think any of the changes she made when existed in that idea look as massive as they seem when you're examining the micro adjustments throughout her life.
Yeah. And I think her last Instagram post said, "I'm going home," which meant she was going home from the hospital, but then it also took on.
We were all a little shocked by that, because she was, Clarity and I were talking about, she was very kind of guarded about her appearance as she started to waste away. And so that post shocked everyone, all of us that knew her well. We were kind of surprised by that post. And so I agree with you that, yes, she was saying, "I'm going home from the hospital," but I really do think she had some kind of inkling.
And you, yeah. Clarity and Leah, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I wanted to just quickly add something about what you were saying about like the idea of change. And one thing that was really interesting for me in reading the memoir, which was really focused on her early life, was learning about these formative years when she was Neil and she was living in a really interesting group, I guess, Squat. They had these, it was a whole group home that just everyone in it subscribed by this philosophy of like kind of one-upping. It was actually really kind of funny. It was like people one-upping each other on like, don't do anything in your daily life the way you're expected to. So it's just full of like these descriptions of how like they would get mad at each other if like somebody did something in the conventional way, like something as small as like how you drink your coffee or like what clothes you wear, or just literally everything was constantly being questioned.
They had a box with clothes that you could throw all your clothes into at the end of the day. And in the morning, you would take out whatever clothes were there. And that was who you were for the day. And it didn't matter what the clothes were, but that's.
Right. I thought that was really fascinating because it was like a really formative time, you know, and it was intense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the Exploding Galaxy commune that was founded by David, the kinetic artist, David Medalla. But David wasn't there at that time. David had already taken off to India. So it was kind of, David was sort of kind of half in, half out with the Exploding Galaxy commune. But I wouldn't say anyone was really running it, but it was just the kind of people that were left over in London, and Jen just jumped right in because, you know, Jen being Jen is never going to shy away from extreme experience, and, you know, especially a young Neil/Jen. And yeah, I think that was very formative. All those early years,
with the addition of psychedelics,
especially
as well.
like late teens. What's that?
With the addition of psychedelics as well. I mean, I think that's an important aspect of Jen's experience.
Yeah.
It was as a propellant, as well as a kind of rigorous self-reframing device.
It was for all. This would have been in the 60s, right?
Yeah, that was 1960. I think the Exploding Galaxy was 1969, 68 to 69. So right in the heyday of the UK, you know, psychedelic explosion. I mean, it was a bit before, but it was still like kind of in full force. So Jen was about 18 or 19 at that time, in about 68. Yeah.
Right. I'm only now seeing that I do see on video, but the thing that's talking is a different square. Hi.
Oh, hi.
And Leah, maybe before we open it to questions, I would love to hear more about your experience of first meeting Jen, and any thoughts that you have to add.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we met in around 2000 for an exhibition at Thread Waxing Space. But I guess just to kind of encapsulate a couple of things, there was something that we talked about at the time of the 2005 exhibition, which was, this was almost exclusively new works that had been, made by the merged identity, Breyer P-Orridge. But we described the recuperation of prior works as being, sorry, I got really distracted.
Yeah.
As being put into their appropriate place in a timeline. So I see the ideas of communal living, collective action, all of these interests that preoccupied Jen, always were about how to change. It was against ideas of control. And in some of the notes that I was looking at in preparation for today, I found some stuff that talking about the sort of relationship with Lady J, kind of instigating modifications that began with ideas about breaking DNA, breaking a message that was viewed as perhaps flawed, and, you know, to like literally change it. And so I also, in my preparation, was kind of like shocked by some of the words they spoke about the beginning of the cultural wars, and talking about community, and I feel like there was just something, I just couldn't believe how now it felt like hearing it, talking about, I'll just quote really briefly. Jen said, and we thought it would be good to have our own extended tribe of people who look for ways to do something that is artistic and creative and evolutionary, and also practical in terms of building a network in advance of chaos. Yeah, artists building communities in advance of chaos.
Wow. I think that is a beautiful quote to end on.
Yeah, here we are.
Here we are. Thank you so much, Leah. I think that we can open it up to questions, because I know that we have some coming into the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Scott, Clarity, Ksenia, Leah, Benjamin, Ryan. That was amazing. We do have a few questions. The first is from our friend GE. GE, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
I was so with the entire experience from the time I saw Throbbing Gristle in LA in 1981. So this has been such a wonderful trip that continues and continues and will continue long before and after all of us. But my question is, William S. Burroughs once said to Genesis, your job is a short circuit control, which you were just talking about a minute ago. And in this way, can we say that the prime message of Gen was, aren't we all absolutely connected to LGBTQI plus people and all the others in their effort to break out of the inherited systems and values and conditioning to be able to encourage everyone in what might be the greatest form of resistance ever, which is the creation of our own identities?
I mean, Jen connected so deeply with the queer community because she was so innately queer in so many aspects. I mean, Ksenia, we were talking about this a little yesterday, Jen, and this relates directly to what Leah had said, Jen's the product of a middle-class white upbringing, and that inherited set of constructs is not only patrolled on the perimeter, but it's fortified by commodities, by status, and there is an extreme amount of punishment meted out for people who would cross those lines. Not only for the people who would have tried to enter into, but for the people who would try to leave. And so Jen, had very early on been exposed in her schooling to the brutality of those patrols, those guardians of I don't know, respectable citizenry, and sort of, the Christo-fascist tradition. And it's one thing to want to escape. It's another thing when one starts to question, what does one escape to? Like what's on the periphery, what's on the margins, what do you actually go into once you access that, let's call it a wilderness, that space that you don't know about. And for Jen, the queer community had created a kind of fortified space that was a possibility, that existed as a possibility. And different magical cultures, whether it was like Wicca or paganism or things like that, had also created these adjunct, fully fledged, institutionally complete cultures that one could move into. The Beats had done it as well with their kind of internalizing of Buddhist scripture and kind of creating a space for themselves. So you're absolutely right. Jen looked to queerness as a space to move, as a space to move into. Maybe not not as a terminus, It's funny to read like old interviews, from, the early like queer separationist days. It was this idea, people didn't want to go to be accepted in church or get married or go to the army or anything like that. People were sort of saying, queer people were saying, we have this opportunity to make something different, something new. And you realize, the powers of assimilation. And as I said, the punishments meted out very quickly, over the years, kind of like created a schism in the queer community where it was assimilationist versus non-assimilationist. And, like it or not, the assimilationists, or at least as it appears, the assimilationists kind of took the upper hand or created the majority sentiment. But I do think, queerness is this kind of radiant permission to not inherit the things that you believe are yours, to realize these things aren't yours to inherit.
Thank you so much for that, Scott. And thank you for that question, GE. The next question is a quick one for you, Ben. Will there be a catalog with the exhibition at Pioneer Works? You're on mute at the moment.
As of yet, no. We're hoping that the exhibition travels to another location. And if enough locations pick it up, then we do hope there will be a catalog.
Great, thank you. And then the last question I'm going to ask on behalf of Fong Bui at the Rail. It's been threaded throughout the chat during this conversation, wondering if Genesis had a relationship with Forrest Bess in thinking about that kinship and conversation between each of their works.
I don't have the answer to this. I know that Genesis knew who Forrest Bess was, but I've never had an in-depth conversation about that artist with Jen. Anyone else?
I'm sure there's an art history paper on this
Sure.
Somewhere.
I'm gonna take a look at it.
I was gonna say, if someone wrote a thesis on this, I'm sure.
And
but I never heard. I mean, yeah, I knew Jen knew who Forrest was, but not that.
A dissertation is being written. I'm sure. Actually, if we don't have more questions, I do have one last question to ask, because I was very curious if any of you know what, for Jeunesse, what the process of building the altar was like. I mean, was that a process of healing? Was it challenging? And what will happen when it travels?
Well, it's interesting. The altar was kind of a late addition, and this is the first public artwork that Jeunesse has ever shown. She's a very creative person, and she's made things before, but she's not so interested in the art world. That wasn't her world. And I had kind of floated the idea by her because, again, I really thought it was important that this show did operate as a memorial in a certain way, since there hadn't been anything as of that time. And I have to say, her stepping up was just it shifted constantly, but oh my goodness, that as a first public artwork is incredible. It's just a stunning piece. There's so many references. The top spiral has 23 layers. Obviously the cutouts in it are from the Brian Geisen Dream Machine, and very much like Leah's description of Jen and Jay creating that sigil in place. That sculpture was a giant ball of materials until about the day before the show opened. So I think there's some inherited strategies there for sure.
Wow, and she blowtorched it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's a pretty she's a tough lady. She's probably happiest on a motorcycle.
Wow.
Well, with that, I'm going to transition us over to poetry. But again, another thank you to Scott, to Clarity, to Ksenia, to Leah, to Benjamin, to Ryan for this amazing conversation today. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Elroy Red, to the stage. Elroy Red works in the space between hope and efficacy until they reach actualization. They are a poet, healer, facilitator, Reiki practitioner. Galvanized in Black, Brown, queer liberation, Red utilizes writing, movement, ritual, and performance to facilitate healing, growth, and alternative futures. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Okay. So, 2 niggas in the house, just me and God. Breakfast, smoothie, and a prayer. God says, I don't want you on your knees no more. My knees, no better liars. My needs, no better liars. My needs start to talk, revolt and freedom. I come from a woman who knows how to use her mouth. God is taking up too much space on the couch. I Tony the bones from betwixt my teeth, sharpen desire upon a body. Is it yours, this ocean, lapping up this shore? Magic in every spark. 99 shots on Fred Hampton's flat. Listen to mama shout, all niggas want you on your back. I got 99 problems, but I ain't got no bat. American pastime, international gratitude. White tees swinging and screaming, can't sit through my attitude. Whoops, I mean plats. Said this, meant that. Keep thinking about why. So often we are asked to choose one identity over another. Why? He's going ape, going animalistic. His voice is in my ears, fills the park and the trees. See, his business is my business. His business is miasma. Skirt. His business is miasma. Skirt up on niggas, skirt down. My business is your asthma. You acting like we already more than friends. Try me, nigga. Catch these hands, big man, real duff. But you're dicking me after I say no, enough is enough. Z tell me Z want moonlight. I know how, I get it. Take 'em to the water. We got our pussies in it, fin to cleanse away demon. Amen, my niggas, we worship them, feminine, strengthen, melanin. Goddess is a moon, tender in the water, we don't gotta holler. My presence is fire, and yes, these situations dire. So when I see you in the street, I will inspire you to die in public. Expounding etymologies, a faggot is a fire. And I have one last piece. Thank you all so much. Let's Go At It Again remix. And the preface to this is that these are parts of a much larger poem, and it's asking questions in a way using this text. Let's Go At It Again remix. On the dance floor, I moved my body smooth as an ice cream scoop. My ass, the ice cream, jiggles, bounces, melts in their mouth, or I am melting, bending over, offering and receiving more to tongue. The perks of a jockstrap, Gegum, Berlin, the spunky lesser-known cousin of Berkheim, or where the locals go. Just like the potty, we know our boundaries and are explicit. Hello to a friend, pre-cum dripping in strands onto the ground. Before making out, your hand is fumbling, your hand is fondling wet. You are turned on, you are turning me around, taste your ass and play with mine. You are sliding me between your cheeks, craning your neck so we can make out. I won't even need lube. Into the bone, some speculations on touch. A talk given at Stadium General Rietveld Academy. Hortense Spillers historicizes flesh versus bodies. Amsterdam hears which such a body cannot prevent or ward off another's touch. For me, the single most powerful evidence of the loss of freedom is the fact that bodies lose their integrity and they be invaded or entered or penetrated, so to speak, by a corrosive power. This touch that we do associate with intimacy can, under the right conditions, can engender invasion and violence in its immediacy in relationship to the enslaved, robs the haptic of its power to heal, to bind, to cure, and becomes instead the power to wound and violate. I am barebacking the sweet yoga guy I met a week ago in a small village where we watched the sun set, where we were distant enough to be vulnerable obtusely. But here and now, I feel you tighten up around me, and after breathy consent, you're eating your cum off of my chest as I eat out your ass. Cum kisses, naked in the kitchen, you are pouring non-alcoholic beer. I am helicoptering my genitalia like a goofball until your body tenses a little. You say you haven't told your family. You say seroconverted. I say I love you. I hug you, you cry. You cry into my shoulder, fount of waterfalls, until I nearly cry, until you say, how can this be so okay for you? And you cry some more. And at one point we start to laugh. That was cathartic. You're a good fuck. Sweet. Slap my ass. We kiss and we shower and we sleep holding each other. Sometimes it's the smallest braveries that you remember. Sometimes it's the smallest braveries that change everything. But like, I can't even think straight. All of the blood is rushing to my clit on a Brooklyn dance floor at my first sex party as Adam talks about getting pissed on, how I missed it. Guys queuing up for him. I'm shy, but I want to hear more. And later he starts a sex party, always donates part of the profit. Meta. Where do you find pleasure? Later, A and I are dancing in what feels like freedom. Let's call it lace. Let's call it sweat. Let's call it unbridled faggotry until the chill of winter calls him for a smoke, lace, lingerie over hairy bulge, GNC, POC, something's a winter's coat can't hide. We make out until he says you're shivering. Let's go inside, find the only private place in this converted group sex space. A bathroom stall. We are fucking so well. Multiple people ask to join in. We both drop our glasses, careful with the jewelry. We come like it's the first time and go at it again. Let's go at it again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elroy Red. That was amazing. And thank you again, one last time to Benjamin, Ryan, Leah, Clarity, Scott, and Ksenia. We would also like to thank the team at Pioneer Works for helping make today's event possible. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. It's a holiday weekend, but be sure to join us on Monday for a community screening and first look at a film in progress from director Jose Espinola titled Musictopia. You can find out more on our website. And now you can turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you leave.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so very much.
Bye.
Thanks,
That was
folks.
neat. Thank you.
Thank you,
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Scott.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
Leah.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you very much. Reading. Have a Ksenia. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Hey,
Thank
Clarity.
you.
Such a pleasure. Stay in touch, please.
It was great.